Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Two Wizards and a Mic, where myself, Shane, and
Andrew.
talk about all kinds of stuff D&D and give you our perspective because we're so incredibly old. It's so sad. But it is October. We were off last week, and now we're back. So this episode, we're going to be talking about rolling up your first D&D character. But before that, you said there's an update from One D&D.
Yeah, I thought I'd just mention quickly. There's been an update for One D&D. We won't go into all of it today because there's quite a bit, but there's a few good things and interesting things as usual. The good thing is they already jettisoned the idea of taking crits away from monsters, so that
Nice.
lasted about 10 seconds.
In D&D time, that's about yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and people were like, that's a terrible idea. So they got rid of that right away. They've got some cool things for the ranger. Ideally, personally, I would take all the magic away from it. Um, Not the magic, but the spell casting.
Right.
We got to have a magical game. Um, but they have some good things for the ranger. Like they've got this cool thing now where Hunter's Mark is just permanently activated. Um, and how they know the Hunter's lore, they know some information about these monsters, sort of like the Witcher understanding the creatures that he's fighting. I think some of
Right.
that is cool. I think too much of that is overkill. Like, you're the ranger in the party knowing every detail about every monster. Um, yeah, so there's some good things. The questionable thing is about they're thinking about now giving inspiration when you roll a one as well, which again, they're overcomplicating a simple game and it doesn't make
Oh,
sense. Why would you reward people for doing something that is doesn't work in the game? Like, one is the worst roll you can get, so now you get inspiration.
but it's like a booby prize. Like, sorry you rolled terribly. Like the chance of your dice hitting the table and not doing what you wanted. That makes no sense. Like, there's
Yeah, it's
completely
almost like the people who are running it don't understand the game is about rolling dice and just seeing what happens. It's part of the game.
yeah.
Um,
And inspiration's kind of one of those rare rewards that you can get for playing well according to the person running the game,
yeah,
potentially of other players saying, hey, they did really cool stuff last night. Maybe we should get,
yeah,
that kind of stuff can happen where it cheapens the whole point of inspiration to me. Like
yeah.
that, it just
Inspiration
makes it
already
so
is a
it's
bit
not
clunky
good.
because it sort of takes out of it's out of the rhythm of the natural game. I think it's already kind of clunky, but I think it's okay. Like it worked in the original rules. Now I think they're overcomplicating it personally. Bark skin they've kind of weakened, which is too bad because druids really need bark skin to have good armor class.
I'll
Um,
say.
and then they've got these really epic 20th level feats that are way overpowered. And it reminds me of like in politics when a party that has no chance of winning is promising the moon. They're like, we'll give everybody $10,000 towards their heating bill, and we'll have college tuition free, um, and they some of these things are great ideas, or both of those are great ideas, but the party's never going to get into power, and it's these epic level boons are things most parties are never going to get because most players don't play to 20th level, and if you do, you're not really probably going to play at that level for too much. We found that once you got that high, the dice start to get a little bit unwieldy when you're rolling the wizards rolling 20d6, and it starts getting a little, the fighters doing like 100 damage and the monsters doing 100 damage.
You may as well at that level. That's where you've become a god, and or your
Yeah,
characters become a god, and you just basically are now at the whim of the game master because the DM's gonna be like, dudes, um, we could be here all day beating each other, Or we could do something interesting. I don't know. There actually, to be honest, I can't even think of a I can't even think of a single thing that would be fascinating for a 20th level. Like, what could you do as a game master running that game to make that interesting?
Well, I think
But
the one thing that DMs usually do, one thing that I've done before, is you start to really push the whole multiverse. So you have players traveling to hell, regularly, or traveling to other parts of the multiverse, and like you said, they're as powerful as a demigod, maybe even a god. So then you have them interacting with these incredibly powerful beings. So you can expand it and make it more epic, but there are limits to the game and to the dice, and it starts getting. We found anyway in our party that we played a few sessions past 20th level, and yeah, it's okay, but I think the best part of the game is probably before then.
well, yeah, because I mean, if they wanted to do anything really constructive to the game, I would think, like a lot of other games, like there are tons of games out there, or video games specifically, where their level caps have been a certain way for a long time, and then they came up with creative ways of like, okay, well, you could be 10th level, but now you can be 30th level. But there's all kinds of steps and caveats and sort of challenges that they have to meet in order to grow that character.
Yeah,
And I think that to me would be interesting. Like once you hit 20th level, it feels like you're, as you said, like a demigod god, and you can throw a lot of damage, but you can also heal a hell of a lot as well.
yeah,
So if you run into a creature that's not necessarily up to the to be able to give you enough run for your money, then it really falls into that realm of, well, maybe we'll just role play for a while until you meet 30 dragons who all want to eat you. But that just seems like a weird escalation of trying to make the game interesting. So I don't know. I challenge Wizards to be like, yeah, so how about we just, we'll tweak a few things, but really, what happens after 20th level? How do we make that interesting? And maybe that's an entire episode of this
yeah,
show in the future.
yeah, definitely. Well, one thing we've done in our monster books is we have a lot of yeah, we have quite a few high level creatures because there's not that many of them. All right, so now the fun part, rolling up your new character, starting the game at the very beginning, which I think for me the first time was either 78 or 79. I can't even remember, and I wasn't the DM because I didn't know anything about the game. And I think we were playing Keep on the Borderlands, which is one of the original adventures. And so really, you only need a six-sided dice, which in Dungeons and Dragons you call a D6, and if you have eight-sided, it's called a D8. But you only need a D6 for making your character. You can have three of them or four if you want to roll quicker, but if you just have one, you can keep rolling it. So you only actually need one six-sided dice, a character sheet, which you can get online on the wizard site and print out, or you can just use a sheet of paper. I know there's actually people who play the game in the military, and they don't necessarily have character sheets and lots of extras. A lot of times they'll just have a sheet of paper and pencils. So a six-sided dice, pencil, paper, that's all you really need. Of course, a lot of people these days use digital versions of that, and you can do that as well. And then you need the basic rules, which are free online on the Wizards of the Coast site, Dungeons and Dragons site, or you buy the player's handbook. And actually, to play the game, that's all you need. You don't need to have the other books. But of course, having Cawood's monster books, that helps too. So to roll up
I
a character,
actually played. Oh, sorry.
yeah, I was just going to say, you don't actually need very much to start the game and to start rolling up a character.
I actually played a game where we didn't have any dice many, many years ago, and we actually took pieces of little. We ripped up paper so it was like roughly little squares, and then we put marks on each side, uh, and basically you threw. If I was rolling a d6, I throw six
Yeah.
pieces of paper, and then whichever one had the mark, that counted. So that actually could be done, and the 20 sided was far more difficult, but eventually we got into a flow where we, knew how to, oh, I need this many pieces, throw those on the table.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I've got a 5, So those kinds of things actually could be done, even without dice, which I haven't thought of that for years. That was probably mid 80s when I was doing that.
Wow. Yeah, not much to start. The first thing, I mean, there's different ways of making the character at the start in terms of deciding what direction you're going to go with this character. Some people copy a famous character from some story they like. Some people find a piece of artwork and they're like, oh, I want to make a character like this, which is easy these days with the internet. There's millions
Yeah.
of pictures, especially on Pinterest. We actually have our own Pinterest, and there's like, I think we've got like 20,000 pictures or something like that on there, maybe more, just for character ideas. So you have your character idea. Usually people start with their class first, and we just ran through all the regular base classes in these videos. I love paladins, wizards, rangers, druids, and I've had a lot of fun playing a 5e rogue. I never played a rogue or thief before. Shane, I think you played
I do recall you
fighters and
enjoying that a lot. You really got
yeah,
into character for that one. That was fun to
yeah,
watch.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you've played a lot of fighters and druids, barbarians, right?
Primarily barbarians, but I've played a couple of fighters. I think one bard, and then more recently the druids and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's basically, I mean, every time I rolled those characters, it was primarily I wanted to accomplish one goal. I wanted to do something I was going to try something I hadn't done before, or try a class I hadn't done before, and that actually kind of it's kind of fun because you're trying, as you said before, like you're copying a character you might have read somewhere, or you had some TV show you liked or whatever, and you're like, that
Yeah.
character, oh, I could make that and do that. And I think that's definitely the best way to go when you're first starting out, because you don't want to be just generic fighter A. You want to be like, oh, I could totally roll a character for Bugs Bunny. Okay, I like Bugs Bunny. What are the traits he has? What kind of things can he do? Oh, it sounds like he's more like a druid, or he's more like a rogue, or he's more like a wizard. So there's all kinds of things you could do that I think are interesting with that sort of play. And I think doing that for the first, dozen characters or so is a brilliant idea, because you don't have to expand beyond your comfort zone. You have something to
Mhm.
fall back on where it's like, oh yeah, that person I liked in that thing, and that kind of stuff. So, like Katniss Everdeen, a ranger, that kind of thing. Which I think you said actually in our episode on Rangers. She was on the list, I
No,
think. Oh no! Oh, there you go.
I didn't even think of that.
I've added someone new.
Yeah, yeah. So then there's also, so usually people decide on the race first, which is really a species of creature. Uh, Humans are still the most popular in the game, but there's many choices. Um, so sorry, people usually go with the class first, then the race, and we've reviewed those as well, most of the main ones. Um, they're talking about removing modifiers from the races, which to me doesn't make sense. I think it's a good idea to keep those in there because it makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
so sometimes people do their race first and then their class. It's up to the player, and then you get into the actual first thing you can roll for. So what are your ability scores? So you have 6 abilities as a player character in Dungeons and Dragons. You have strength, which is self-explanatory, dexterity, which is how agile you are, constitution, basically how tough you are, how resilient you are, intelligence, and wisdom, and then charisma. And charisma is not just your ability to get along with people, but also your ability to intimidate people or persuade people. So these 6 abilities, you have a few options now of how to roll the scores. The old school way, when we started Dungeons and Dragons in the late 70s, we rolled 3d6, and we rolled the abilities in order, and you just took what you got.
That's exactly
Now,
how I played, definitely.
yeah, now the new version that most people do is you roll 4d6 and you drop the lowest one and you choose where you want to put your scores. The other option is now a new one called Point Buy, where you have 27 points to spread around the 6 abilities. And again, the highest you can have to start is 18. And then the last one is called a standard array, where you just get this set of scores: 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. And then you divide them into which abilities you want. So you have basically 4 versions, 4 different ways you can do it. And that's really going to be up to the dungeon master. I probably I'd say at least 70 or 80% of the groups I've heard of use 46 and drop the lowest one. I think most people do that.
Wow. I
So,
do 46 and then drop, or I do the standard array just because I'm familiar with it. Although I do catch myself doing the old school way as well. But because you want to have particular scores for particular types of class, you'll want a score that's higher, that's going to give you higher intelligence or higher charisma or higher strength for brute force and that kind of stuff. But definitely, I think for me, yeah, 46 drop the lowest, and standard array are probably the ones I go with most often.
all right. Um, Class focus. So another part of building your character is thinking about, what does this class do? Like, if you're a paladin, who do you worship? What god do you worship? Are you part of a knighthood? Um, and then backgrounds, which we'll talk more in depth about next time. We can have a whole show about it, the next show.
Oh,
So
oh yeah,
backgrounds are, in some ways, it's your occupation that you did most of your life before you became an adventurer. Um, and some of the choices are things like sailor. A new one in One D&D is going to be farmer, and sage is another one, or urchin. You were a street urchin. So there's a number of different backgrounds in the player's handbook that you could choose. Um, the general part of your background, like where are you from, what's your family like, were you married, are you married now, do you have kids, how old are you, all that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be really extensive, although every player is different. Languages, these are listed in the player's handbook. So common, usually every player has, because that's the general language and the one that humans speak. And then usually characters have 1 or 2 more. As far as how your character is equipped, you have a certain amount of gold that you can spend on equipment, or you can choose the equipment that comes with the class. So your armor, it depends on your class and how much gold you have, because the really expensive armor, like plate armor, you're not going to be able to afford when you start. Weapons, there's lots of options, only limited by how much gold you have, how much money you have. And equipment, you can think about what's going to be useful. I almost always have a backpack, bedroll, tinderbox, because you can start a
yep.
fire, rations, and then often torches. But there's a lot of choices for equipment. And
I was
again, limited
laughing
by.
earlier. I was laughing because you were talking about how you normally wouldn't be able to afford plate at the very beginning. And I remember, so many times where it's like, oh, this character could use plate mail like right out of the gate. How much stuff do I get? If I sell all of this, can I buy the plate? I never did, but, because you could never afford it anyway. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, a good thing for dungeon masters to remember about starting out, the players really don't have enough money. They really shouldn't have enough money to get equipment and a horse, for example. So that helps
Yes.
you start to like, you don't actually have to have a big area to start, because the players aren't going to be able to go very far. They shouldn't be able to afford to, pay for a passage on a long sea journey usually. And so you can really build your world out. You can just start with a little village or a little area and then slowly build out. And then by the time they can afford horses or to travel by ship, then hopefully you have a bigger area for them to explore. Your name. So a lot of people go to a lot great lengths to get a name. There's lots of lists in the Xanathar's book, and then there's tons and tons of name generators online that people could use. And then obviously inspirations are all over the place for names and stories. Alignment. So here's the hot button issue.
I was waiting for this.
So the funny thing about this is that it arguing that it's not important in the game is like saying that that there's no dragons in the game or there's no monsters in the game, because there are, and alignment just is. Alignment already
Yeah.
is there. Whatever character you make, whatever story you write, there is alignment. So all alignment is doing is explaining that definition, defining that aspect of a character. That's what it is. So people, I think, have it backwards. Alignment is already there when whatever story you write, there's alignments. And
Yeah.
in D&D, they use that to show you more specifically, okay, let's explore, let's see what it's like. So I think it's very useful. And it's a big part of the game to me and all the monster books that we write. So
Well,
you can choose your.
one thing about alignment that I really like is if you go online, if you're a brand new player today, going online and looking up D&D alignments that have, say, D&D alignments Star Trek, D&D alignments Star Wars, things that you might have seen or books you've read, where people have gone out and basically created these grids where, okay, here are all the alignments listed out, and here are the characters from popular fiction and different movies and TV and stuff. And I actually find that really helpful because when you're playing a certain class, you might want to go, okay, well, I kind of want to be like this or I want to be like that. But having a visual grid with those kinds of elements on them gives you a really clear idea of, oh, yeah, so Han Solo behaves this way and his alignment would be that. Oh, interesting. And then I think it really kind of juices you and gets your creative flow going, because not only are you thinking about your character as you're building it in terms of alignment, but you have these characters that you can draw from, like, oh yeah, I want to be this alignment because I think of this thing, but oh no, wait, but my character wouldn't be like that because I want to be like that. And you can really dig into just that one little aspect of when you're creating a character, because just like your background, the alignment is going to inform. Surprisingly, I think for a lot of new players, is they don't understand that there's so much within these alignments and there's so much within the backgrounds that they are really paired together really, really tightly. And when you're first starting out, go out and find resources that give you some sort of little mental nuggets to go, oh yeah, okay, that character I like from that movie and that's the alignment they were. All right, perfect. Then I can actually take those and inform some decisions on how I'm putting this character together. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
I just get really
exactly.
excited about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. Really good point. There's lots of examples of that, of different shows, and talking about like in Star Wars or Firefly or Harry Potter um, or Lord of the Rings, talking about what character is what.
Especially.
So, and it can help you understand it very clearly. And again, it's already there. We're not imposing alignment on things. We're explaining what's already there. So, like, I think if we look at Star Wars really quickly, okay, Luke Skywalker, I think lawful good,
Yep.
because he follows the rules and he's good, on the side of good. We have Han Solo, chaotic good, right?
I would agree. I'm actually looking up a grid. I want to see exactly
Yeah.
how correct we are.
Okay. More independent, um, not necessarily following the rules, but still good. Neutral good is one of those more ones that's trickier. So it's someone who is good, but they're not following the rules and they're not just off doing their own thing. So that might be some of the other leaders in the Rebel Alliance, or like Leia's father. What was his name? Um, on
Oh,
Alderaan.
oh my lord. Oh yes, I know exactly what you're talking.
Yeah,
Bail Organa.
Bail Organa. So he might be maybe more neutral good. And some of the leaders in the rebels, I might say, are neutral good. Lawful neutral, that would be Luke or Luke's aunt or uncle.
Yeah, so this
Neutral, I
kind of
would
grid is what
say,
we were talking about.
yeah, neutral, maybe Obi-Wan Kenobi when he was living as a hermit on Tatooine. At that
Yeah.
point, he was neutral, I think. Chaotic neutral, Lando, for
Oh,
sure, just
easily.
doing his own thing. Um, Neutral evil. So these are people who will do what they can if they can get away with it. So these are like lawyers and thieves. Trust me, I know neutral evil. Neutral evil, some people say, is the worst. So I would say neutral evil is like Jabba the Hutt and all the gangsters.
Right,
Um,
right.
Chaotic evil is like, I think, Greedo the bounty hunter, or um, some of the more destructive evil creatures. But most of the empire, I would say, is lawful evil because they follow the
Yeah,
rules,
yeah, I can agree with
and
that.
they follow a structure, like the Nazis. And that's basically who they're modeled on. Another good example of chaotic evil would be orcs in Lord of the Rings and the Drow. They've tried to make Drow a different alignment, but I think they really are chaotic evil. So that, like we said, there's lots of different ways of looking at it, and I think it helps define your character. Then you can think about your character's age. Most heroes in a medieval fantasy game are going to be sort of between, late teens and early 30s, maybe. But I've known some people who've stretched that. They've had an older hero. I think
I
you've
think
done
one
that
of my
before.
characters was like in the human equivalent because he was a different species, but he would have been like 65, 70, that kind of age range, which um, it gives you all kinds of opportunities to be like, well, okay, we have to get from point A to point B. Oh, my back! Oh, my sciatica! Oh, I can't quite do it. Or something like that could happen. And I actually had a table for one of my characters like that, where it was basically that your sciatica acts up, or oh, you can't quite make that when you roll a certain dexterity roll, you will trip, or or you'll stumble, or your knees will give out, or something. And that kind of stuff, I think, can give you all kinds of opportunities for life to happen, where it's like we're not. I think a lot of the time, I think heroes are at least sometimes compared to like we're superheroes, which they're not.
Hmm.
There are superheroes, angels, that kind of stuff that can be brought in D&D.
Hmm.
But when you have things like with your age, play with it. Like if you
Yeah.
are very, very young, or maybe you try something that, well, maybe I'm young, but I'm not strong enough yet to do that activity,
Hmm.
or I'm too old to do that activity,
Yeah.
and you just want to lay down and not move for a while. But stuff like that, totally something that I think working with your DM is going to be huge.
Yeah.
Even
Well,
with
we've
your,
definitely
yeah,
had people in our group who've played younger characters, like in their late teens or early 20s, and they've portrayed them as very immature,
yeah,
which is fun. That's fun playing a character like that too. I mean, I did that with my rogue to a certain degree. I think I only made her she's only around 20 or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So she's quite she acts before she thinks a lot. Um, Another interesting to think about, and I think important in the game, is the size of your character, because if you want to have some realism in the game, uh, unlike the people talking about Rings of Power, it doesn't matter what they're doing because it's all fantasy. Realism does actually help the story make sense and grounds it in some reality, right? So
Well,
um,
yeah.
I often ask players about their size because, say, an arrow just misses one player, and then it might hit, like if a halfling is the one who gets missed by an attack, and behind them is a Goliath in the party, maybe that arrow hit the Goliath. Um, and if it depends how you weigh, like if you're how much you weigh. If your character's very light, like a halfling or gnome, maybe this ogre can toss you.
Yeah. Well,
So,
exactly. I mean, these kinds of elements all play into that because the side, like, as soon as you mention halfling, instantly my brain is like, oh, well, remember that time that blah 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 and this happened, and I was able to dodge out of the way because not because I was actually dodging, but I kind of did this, oh, because the roll was such that the arrow just passed over your head, where these kinds of, I mean, on top of that, you can actually have those kinds of things play to your advantage. Or, as you pointed out, what if there's a Goliath behind the shorter person? Because we always have those conversations ultimately where it's like, okay, you're all in a thin hallway.
yeah,
Who's in front? It's like, oh, well, I could
exactly.
still fire an arrow at the villain because the halfling's just in front of me, but I'm not going to hit him because he's so short. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And I mean, really, when I'm DMing, if I think about it, I'm visualizing everything. So I want to know what things look like. I want to know what the party looks like in that environment, in that story. And often we talk about things too with going into some sort of vehicle or a boat. I will often ask
yeah.
you, oh, who's going with who? Because again, if there's a Goliath in the party, or maybe there's two gnomes and a halfling, they can easily fit in a little rowboat. Or, oh, actually, we've talked about this quite a bit with horses.
Yeah.
We've often had where somebody says, "Oh, I'll just take the halfling on my horse with me." Easy.
Yeah. I'll just grab the Goliath. No, no, you won't.
No. Um, so the size and how fast they are. No, it's funny. One of the things in One D&D is they're talking about all humanoids moving the same. I definitely wouldn't change that. I think it's interesting that because halflings and gnomes are smaller, they can't move as fast. And a wood elf, because it's more used to the woods and um, it's very more more agile creature. Their speed is faster than everybody else. So I think knowing your speed, including that in your character, and then your appearance. Is your character very handsome? Are they slim? What are their eye color? What's their hair like? Um, yeah, I think it helps you visualize your character and define your character.
Well, we've had characters in our party that have had deformities or some sort of. I think probably the most memorable. The character I can't remember the name of the character, but the they had an injury that their teeth were like gone on one side and that impaired their speech. And
Yeah,
when they spoke, they kind of had this kind of thing going on,
yeah,
but at the same time it also influenced, and this was by the person who created the character, made sure that their charisma matched what was going on, because it's like, well, I have this injury from 20 years ago. It has impaired the speech, it's done this, it's done that, so the charisma is naturally going to be lower,
right.
and but it's also given me the ability to do these other, it's in, they had some other sort of things that compensated, and it gave life to the character. Like, I'm
Yeah,
always obsessed with this whole idea of, like, you have to treat the character as though it's alive, not just
yeah,
a game piece on a board.
yeah.
So playing with those things, definitely when you're putting a character together, it makes the character creation part fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you mention injury, I feel bad about because we have these extra effects tables where
Mm.
on critical hits, people can take extra damage and extra have prolonged injuries. And we have one player who constantly has injuries to her eyes and her face over and over again. She's had, I'd say, at least three characters who've lost an eye, I think. So I feel bad about all these characters whose injuries now are a part of their new life.
Well, I mean, that's actually the other part too, which I think is also fun, is when you do think about, like, your eye color, hair color, skin color,
Yeah,
those kinds of things. That you were mentioning earlier about how there are plenty of portraits out there that you could use and utilize. Um, something that I've been doing of late is, if you have been watching the internet and you can see these AI created art pieces, I've actually been playing with some of them to create
Oh
portraits
yeah.
for D&D characters. Like I would like elf, and it has to have this and this kind of background, and they're kind of amazing when they're created. And I gotta say that really can inform you um, of what the appearance is, because if you are, I mean, naturally, I'm not going to assume that people can draw or anything of that nature, but you could actually use portraits to just to look at them and say, oh, that kind of matches sort of what I sort of have in my head. And if you see the character with a certain hair color or a certain eye color or some sort of thing, you could actually go, you know what, it'd be cooler if their hair color was this and match this. And you can kind of play with that sort of stuff. And it gives you, again, gives you more enjoyment, I think. Like the player, you're just kind of being able to touch all the aspects of the characters, you're putting it together, and it just gives you more fun and enjoyment because it's just a game.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me again. I'll actually include our Pinterest link down in the bottom, down below here, so that people can go take a look. And we have, like I said, thousands of pictures um, by races and classes, and so you can take a look there. And like Shane says, there are so many ways of getting inspiration for character building, and it is so much fun. And another thing I am remembering is that in the advanced Dungeons and Dragons game, which that version came out in the early 80s, they started to go to town on the character sheet. So originally it was just one page, and then it was 2 pages, and then I think I have a version here somewhere that has 4 or 5 pages. And it started to include things like there was a place where you could put your own portrait, and then
Yep.
you could put your, like, there was a little section to put your mount's story and abilities and everything, and different tables for treasure, or places that you could write all the treasure you had, a place where you could list your enemies, and then at the very bottom it had your last will and testament.
I do recall having some of that.
Yeah,
And I probably had dozens upon dozens of character sheets that I had put out together, but I spent most of my time like drawing in that little square. Like, what are they going to look at? I mean, they look
yeah,
terrible because I'm not the greatest of artists in
yeah.
terms of portraiture.
It would look like my picture. I do this. I'm the same. Yeah, I can do abstract art, but try to make something look real.
Forget
No,
it.
no.
This is a cubist interpretation of what my character might look like.
Yeah,
It's three
yeah,
lines and 6 colors. Uh, but overall, I think that when you're creating a character, the goal is really to have fun and to give life to a character that you can actually, and don't feel like you're stuck, because once the character's on the page and you start playing it, uh, stuff can happen, attitudes can change, injuries can occur. The DM might go, hey, I just thought of a great idea that if you had a cousin or a parent or somebody, I think it would be interesting to bring them in. What do you think your character's parents might be like, and what
yeah,
might they do? And that can inform the action of the thing, because I remember there was a couple times where parents showed up and the character's demeanor changes entirely, like, okay, mom, okay, dad, sure, all right, thanks, that kind of stuff. That
yeah,
whole problem of becoming 16 again. And
yeah,
so and it could be anything. Like, there could be an inheritance that comes along, and how would your character react to that? Well, something in your sheet is going to inform you of what your character is going to be if you get a bit lost. But your characters can evolve. What if they go through a harrowing adventure run by this guy I know, Cawood Publishing, worldofmere.com. But if you have, a DM that actually wants to play with the characters as well, like if you have an experience where the character dies, I don't know, 10 times in a row and is brought back, maybe that would impact what your character would be like. And you get to play with that kind of stuff, because you can go add it to the background, and then suddenly my this thought about this or that changes this element of my character sheet, because why not? your character is going to change. Your character does not have to be the same as day one. Um, but getting from day one into the future, uh, just start having fun with it. Start go get some dice because that would be cool.
Yeah.
The paper thing was annoying. Don't do the paper thing like I suggested earlier.
Yeah.
And because eventually you will have something like this on your desk that has a lot of dice in it. So it will happen. It will happen.
Yeah, and next time we can talk about a little more detail, maybe about what your character sheet looks like when you've rolled those ability scores. That's the most important thing, is getting those done. That's going to define a lot of your character, what they can do. And then we can go into more detail about backgrounds and
Yeah,
yeah, and maybe even start talking a little bit about role playing your character as well.
exactly. Because that's the whole point. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
But on that note, um, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening to the audio version of this podcast. And don't forget, we publish every week, or we try to. And if you have any questions or any comments or anything, please do send them to us because there's all kinds of contact information down there at the bottom of the video. But tell us what you think, how we're doing. What have we missed? Have we missed anything? Are we going to, like, should we talk about something in more depth? Because this show gets better when you get involved. So thanks. Yeah, I think that's cool. And as always, see you all next week. Goodbye,
Later.
goodbye, goodbye.